Answer a quick question for the presentation. Do you want me to send you the presentation or
Yes.
do screen share?
Um, you can screen share from your side, Adrian.
Okay.
Yeah, you should have control for that.
Okay.
So we'll kick it over to Adrian for our talk today. If you've got questions along the way, go ahead and throw them in the chat, and then we'll have time at the end for Q&A.
Can you guys see the presentation?
Yep.
Awesome. Awesome. Great. So my name is Adrian Whant. I'm the founder of Ebra AI and Wagamore, two different projects that really focus on AI decision systems. So in other words, two different projects, two different audiences, um, but that focus on AI decision systems. So it's almost like two sides of the same coin. And so today I'm going to focus on how to build AI decision systems that actually work. And one of the approaches, how you should be thinking about if you are going to be building decision systems for your businesses or verticals. So one of the things that it's very common and we continue to see across different industries, it's basically the fact that when it comes to um, information or dashboards or business intelligence, one of the things that we see a lot is that businesses are basically most AI systems, if you will, today they're actually generating incredible good insights. But businesses alone, regardless of the business, they're just not necessarily operate alone on insights. Businesses operate on decisions that get made across the board, workflows, coordination, trade-offs, and execution. So the gap is that I've seen is while building both companies, Ebra AI, both projects, and Wagamore, the biggest challenge isn't just the AI models per se. It is how fragmented all the signals are across different operational contexts. For instance, like real world workflows come together into systems that can actually support decision making and action. So when it comes to looking at the real world, what it looks like, AI looks amazing. It almost feels like magic, which is really exciting. And people get super excited about what AI is capable of doing when it comes to generating, across multimodal and multi-format content. But the reality is that when it comes to operations, the environment gets pretty messy. And the reason being is because when it comes to systems and operations in business, you have data that's coming from across different sources, right? Regardless of the industry that you work in. So, for instance, they're filled with siloed systems when it comes to decision, but at the same time, operationally and software, for instance, spreadsheets, operational constraints. Sometimes weather, depending where the industry you operate in, timing, user behavior, which is individual user behavior by different stakeholders within your organization, logistics, and obviously human decision making. So the challenge is usually isn't in the model itself. The models are super intelligent and excellent at reasoning different models, but it's really the environment and how do you operate inside within that environment. So basically, one of the things that is always really good to understand is sort of the difference between two things, two different worlds. One of them obviously being the world of Copilot, which are fantastic, and those are the things that you see pretty much every day. And that's what you see being applied in different businesses. For some reason, people tend to sort of gravitate towards Copilot as a way of using, implementing, or applying AI into their businesses. But the reality is Copilots only do a few things. They summarize content, they're really good at it. The answer questions within your context, meaning within your content and within your businesses, and assist in directionally or providing insights. But the reality is that when you start thinking of AI as a system, a decision system, which is ultimately you want to execute or you want to embrace and sort of bring together all the siloed data across different ecosystems. You want it to be interpreted, you want it to be normalized, and you want that data to be reasoned over. And then once you reason over that data, which is what humans we tend to do individually, you have to make decisions. And this is the power, this is where we're moving in today when it comes to decision systems and AI being applied. So most companies do not have um, explicit um, decision logic, and that this is where business intelligence comes into place. Everybody keeps asking at individual level, who owns the decisions within the organizations? What are the different constraints, or what constraints matter from the point of view of the individual that is has a very specific task or role? What actions to take next? And then, what truly matters. So that varies from team to teams. So in this specific use case that I'm working on, one is for Abra AI, is an AI decision intelligence system targeting the fashion retail industry that focuses on surfacing inventory exposure, which is a huge business problem, not only in the US, but globally. In the US, for instance, we lose $170 billion in excess of inventory every single year. Not only has a negative impact when it comes to from a revenue perspective, but at the same time has a terrible impact when it comes to sustainability. And so without getting into the whole ecosystem, but basically these are huge issues that the industry, the fashion industry and the retail industry needs to solve because now there are regulations in place, not only within the European Union, but also in the US, especially in the state of California. Moving to New York, there are new laws and regulations to address that excess of inventory. Um, and so what happens is basically uh, retail has tons of data. They don't need more of it. But the issue in this particular case, what they do is they don't know what to do because it comes from different sources and there are multiple decision makers. So for instance, in this particular use case with ERA, what we do is we surface that inventory exposure that is a risk, whether it's excess of inventory or getting ahead of the game, making sure that we're able to predict where product is most likely to sell and move that inventory. And so the system does allocation decisions, whether it's internal allocation or external allocations. And then when those decisions scenarios are presented, including the human in the loop, basically the user can actually, or the AI can make decisions as to what to do, how to optimize the inventory, whether it happens internally or externally. So in summary, basically, when it comes to decision systems, you have fragmented data, data gets normalized and interpreted into sort of feature engineering or metrics so that it makes sense. The AI reasons over that data. Obviously, there is a business logic particularly applied to that particular business case so that the user can make decisions, obviously, along with AI, and then obviously execute. In other words, let's say in the case in fashion retail, move a piece of inventory or SKU from one place to the other for optimization. And that's when agentic AI comes into play. The other project you can check out, which is Wagamore. You can check it out at wagamore.com. It's contextual AI for the physical world or in the physical world. Wagamore actually addresses one of the biggest problems that dog parents, total different, but again, it's a decision system. And what it does is dog parents, for instance, every single day have to make micro decisions in order what to do with their dog on a daily basis. And what I mean by that, looking at environmental signals, again, we're looking at silo data signals, geolocation, and for instance, the dog's profile based on their breed or based on their breed and behavior. So what this decision system does is tells in this case, the dog parent what to do, right? What is the best time to go for a walk? What is the most relevant park? How hot is for instance, the sidewalk? Is it safe to take my dog out? Finding the right park based on community input and community feedback. For instance, in real time, connected to agentic, what to do right now by learning your behavior. That's again, those are features within the application. And then the other one, take action, which is basically taking action and let's say booking a service or booking a vet near you and so on and so forth, and learning behavior, having a behavioral loop. Um, so where is the future of basically when it comes to AI and decisions? As I already said, a lot of most people stayed on the surface, or what I call the surface, which is with AI copilots, which are fantastic. But the reality is AI has been designed to go way deeper, to be able to do a lot of remove the friction of all the decision making when it comes to businesses. And we are there already. So the evolution of AI system, where are we going? Well, we're moving from search, from learning, from understanding, from surfacing insights, but now we're moving into decisions, scenarios, what to do with something, whether it's a business logic, and take actual action, meaning go all the way through to execution. Any questions? Okay. So the other portion is data structure matters more than prompts. And basically, for instance, when it comes to going back to the fashion retail project, most people, what they've been playing right now today is basically bringing in data, dropping it into copilots in order to make some sort of system or sort of make sense out of that data so that the AI could potentially reason based on what you're creating or the output or the outcome that you want. One of the things that I found that to take a pilot idea, for instance, from idea or from pilot to real execution is for this particular project, for the retail project for AI, I'm working with Databricks, which allows to handle the siloed data in order to basically structure that data. Because remember, data, when it comes from different sources, comes completely unstructured. Depending on the industry you work on, not everybody follows the same standards, how to normalize data. And then at the same time, how do you turn that data, vast amount of data at an enterprise level that keeps streaming and continuously flowing into your systems to make sense in real time and to turn it into the metrics that make sense from a business perspective or no or basically into feature engineer that will make sense for your AI system. So what's really critical that starts separating that, obviously we know that data is critical, good quality data is critical. It's, garbage in, garbage out, which is it's an accounting principle that we heard all along. And the same thing happened with AI. So if you have bad data, you're going to get bad results. And not to mention if the AI hallucinates in trying to make sense over that data and not knowing the full business logic, which is critical to any businesses. So in order to make sure that you get a really good output based on the systems, if you are creating AI decision system, is to make sure that that data naturalization and normalization is actually handled. In my personal opinion, I like to handle it separately. I build my systems, obviously, when it comes to data on Databricks platform, and then reasons over the models that I use for EBRA, which has a very specific business logic and so on and so forth. So in my particular case, I built everything on GCP for enterprise infrastructure and use Gemini models, the ones that are really good for reasoning. Oops, sorry. So anyway, so what builders should be doing basically today and thinking about if you're going to be building when it comes to AI is basically start with decision first. Truly understand what your business, how your business makes decision, not only at the overall business, but most importantly, how different silos or how different teams or how different stakeholders basically make decision, a business decision, looking at the same problem and how do they address it and make decisions based on that problem. Because a lot of the discrepancy when it comes to getting outputs from an AI comes out of that actually. All of us could be looking at the same problem and we're all going to make different decisions based on our roles and based on how we think about the problem. So normalizing that is critical. So decisions first, as I mentioned, and then basically design the system around context, the workflows that apply to your relevant business, look at the different constraints, coordination, and execution. So the true value will come from actually from systems that help organizations act and not just simply analyze or surface information through dashboards. Um, and so, oops, sorry. So the future of AI is basically coordinated execution. Once again, looking at the entire ecosystem, looking at your context, how different business units are making decisions around a, let's say, a single problem, and make sure that it is normalized and also drives the business outcome in the business logic, drives the business outcome that it's relevant for your business. So that's that.
Adrian, can you walk us through the kind of how does someone get started with Abra? What are they coming? I mean, I understand kind of as you described it, but what um, what's the biggest utility value for the user of Abra?
Yes. So the biggest utility addresses the needs, the business needs of different stakeholders within the fashion retail industry. So one of them is, for instance, when I was doing the discovery exercise, speaking to different fashion brands of all different sizes, from large enterprise multi-billion-dollar stores or fashion brands to smaller brands that make anywhere between $5 to $7 million in or euros in revenue. And the biggest value is one of the biggest problems happens is when people have to make decisions, allocation decisions internally. Whether, so for instance, one enterprise brand that owns 320 stores in North America and Europe, basically their biggest problem is how they move inventory within their entire ecosystem. And the decisions that are being made by individuals, let's say sales managers at the store level, why they're making allocations decision or not making decisions based on their purview, rather than looking at the overall margin or let's say the entire business and see, well, if we move this inventory from store A to point B, that performs better or the product is most likely to sell, which is that's what AI reasons over, understanding the forecasting and reasoning. What they do basically, the value is make the right decision so that we protect, in this case, the margin, or you move the inventory before the inventory becomes a problem and becomes excess of inventory. They say, yes.
Go ahead, finish your
No,
thought.
and I was going to say, so it's, for instance, for this particular case, Abra focuses on solving for excess of inventory when it's a problem. When it's too late already and you're sitting, or let's say 1 or 2 seasons, or even more, than what I've seen across fashion retailers, and how can that move that inventory that's become stale already? Whether it's by actually optimizing for new marketplaces or different markets around the world. And then internally is mostly allocation decisions and optimization within a fashion brand's or retailer ecosystem.
We'll go to thank you for that. Ryan's question, and maybe Sean's is related, but how do you recommend building in human oversight or verification?
So the going back to the case of Abra AI, when it comes to when Abra AI basically presents different decision scenarios, in this case, it will, for instance, it will say, protect margin by X%, or if you decide to discount a specific SKU by X percentage, it does obviously the entire analysis, how much money you're going to be reducing the product and the financial impact. That's already when the human in the loop, in this case, could be a merchandiser or a planner, gets involved because you get presented two different scenarios how you're going to allocate that inventory. You have the human can actually override and say, well, this is what the AI is proposing for this particular decision, for this allocation decision, but I'm going to allocate inventory differently. So what not only you can actually override it as a human, but at the same time, it's very critical that it keeps getting the human input. Because what it does is now we get into a learning loop that the actual AI learns over time, and it does two things. It basically studies and looks at past decisions made by a human and past decisions and recommendations made by the AI, and then you get a comparison to see which one is more effective. But they are always involved throughout the decision making.
Sean, do you want to come off mute and add and ask your question, maybe add to it?
So you talk a lot about co-pilot models. Is there a way that I can add context to Abra in terms of existing policies or other context than just a large prompt?
So when it comes to Abra AI, basically it is based on tenant usage, meaning let's pretend that and I was it John the question or Sean? Sean.
Sean.
Sean, so let's pretend that you are yourself a fashion brand, a retailer. The what we do is basically we consume all the data from your different sources, right? And that we integrate it into we connect through an API. And so it goes through the process of analyzing all the data that comes from different siloed sources that you may have,
I
right?
understand that. I guess my
Mm.
question is, can I provide explicit guidance as a background? Is there a way to is it just a
Yes.
very large prompt, or am I able to actually give you other kinds of guidance than just the data?
Besides the data, we
Besides the data, can I give you
beside
explicit policies, for example?
yes, yes, for specific URLs.
And that has
Yes.
to be in the prompt, or that can be in supplemental files.
That is what it could be supplemental files because those are business logics or gut rails probably that you may have.
So is this like a Claude Code model, or is this simply just a large prompt, like a Copilot model?
This is a well, we I use Gemini, for instance,
Okay,
for reasoning.
is it just a large prompt effectively?
If you have very specific business logic and guardrails that need to be implemented, that actually goes into the code. So what we do is we'll sort of customize.
You'll code that for me. I can't extend that. So then I
No,
come back to you. If I want to change my policies, then I come back to you and you update.
those things have to be hard coded and have to be taught to the
You're
model.
are you familiar with how Claude Code works?
I don't use Cloud Code works. No, I don't use
Okay.
Cloud Code. Yeah,
Okay.
no,
Okay.
I
So
I
there you have
basically.
supplemental context files that you can add that it'll take
Mhm.
guidance from.
Right. So in this case, what we do is we actually directly but not train, we teach the model, in this case, Gemini, to actually work within those guardrails because those guardrails may only apply to your business, not to everyone. Now
But those
that's
guardrails, you and I talk, and then you encode those into the
correct.
model. I can't code them myself.
Well, there are two ways. So the way that's one way, and I will always recommend for that to make sure those things are hard coded. But then you have what's called Atelier. Atelier actually it's the AI brain that sits across the different modules of Airbra AI, and you can actually ask and prompt within your ecosystem and within your context and business context, you can actually prompt Abra AI with new business logic. But again, you have to have a good source of the AI cannot basically make up gut rails that are specific to your business. So that has to be
Thanks.
taught.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Adrian. Adrian, you talked about Wagamore and Abra and
Yes.
kind of the daily piece of this and the real-time piece of this. What are some other applications that you're currently building or that you're helping clients with around the kind of daily feedback and daily planning?
So right now I'm working on those two projects. It's, obviously it's a lot. One is obviously for the scale of fashion retailers. So it's, from a scale perspective is highly demanding because going back to Sean's questions, every single retailer, which across the board, the fashion industry tries to be as consistent or standardized as possible, but it's just honestly, it's not the case. It varies across the board from the different sizes of retailers. Now, when it comes to Wagamore, for instance, I'm working with OEMs, automobile OEMs, because Wagamore is starting out as an entry point when it comes to defining what the future of mobility and human mobility will be. So I begin with Wagamore, with dog pick centric, because dogs, well, they're highly, it's a highly emotional consumer behavior, and people do a lot of things with their dogs. They take them pretty much everywhere. So it's become actually a natural conversation that I'm having with OEMs, vehicle OEMs, for Wagamore to be embedded into their ecosystem for innovating in-cabin experiences, smart in-cabin experiences. But that's just the beginning. Dogs is the now what I actually when I was speaking at a conference alongside with Mazda, Toyota a couple of weeks ago in Palo Alto. Basically, what I'm building now is starting out with dogs because once again, they force us to make decisions, but micro decisions every day. But most importantly, what happens now is I'm looking at this as an entire ecosystem that redefines human mobility. So that's the next thing that I'm going to be working on. By starting out with dog parents, which is very critical right now. It's something that is getting the attention of OEMs from as I mentioned, innovating within the in-cabin experience because I do believe that when it comes to mobility, what is human or pet mobility, everything begins before, in this case, when it comes to vehicles, everything happens before the ride, during the ride, and after the ride. And we have already seen some trends, by just simply looking at the ride sharing industry, how they have expanded their business models outside of just plain ride sharing.
Very
So,
interesting.
yeah, that's what I'm working on right now.
Teddy, go for it.
All right, question for you, Adrian. I'm curious to hear. So I work so I work in ERP consulting, and I consult with
Mhm.
like mid-market fashion brands. And one of the things that they ran into, and I'm curious if this is something your system accounts for, is like supply chain risk. So when all of the tariff issues and those type of things started happening, they started having to try and account for, okay, based on what's going on with kind of the changing landscape of what the tariffs are going to be, they put it on the boat, then it changes, and then trying to account for, okay, how do we deal with this? And then there are decisions that were made around, okay, how do we then mitigate some of this risk by moving some of the um, the manufacturing or from some of the purchasing to like Vietnam or Mexico or something like that. Is this something that it can feed back into this decision making layer with the data that they have?
Based on the way you're presenting it, framing it, yes, it could. Is it something that we're currently focusing on the pilots? No, but it could definitely, I mean, it makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, I was just
Yes,
curious.
so it's something that can definitely be infused. Right now, Ebra AI is focused on based on decision making when it comes to allocation, looking at the
Hmm.
entire
Hmm.
allocation and margin issues. One of the things that keep decision makers at the fashion retail, besides that issue that you brought up, which is a very real issue, right? Something that came up in, recently. Uh, it's not an industry standard. It's what it keeps them up at night is excess of inventory, making too much of it, which has been a practice in the entire fashion industry for many, many years, and an acceptable business decision. But the problem is now you need to, on top of that, you have new legislation that is really cracking down and different goals that need to be met established by the European Union. Any global fashion brand doing businesses with the European Union, they will have to comply. And obviously in the US, we're actually starting to mirror that with SB 707 and other pieces of legislations that have passed. So our focus right now is, as I mentioned, is decision around allocation to make sure that you place your items, your products, your SKUs where the product is most likely to sell, or make even decisions as to whether or not you should be closing, shutting down a store that's not performing over time. And then at the same time, finding new markets for that already stale inventory, whether it's by, reaching back to somebody who have historically purchased your products or looking at global markets, right? That is most likely to buy your product. But
So I have a follow-up question to this.
yeah,
So in the context where there's a fashion company that is, multi-channel, so they, have a Shopify site,
yeah,
they're selling through big box retailers, they're selling through, specialty retailers, et cetera, when you're talking about what kind of decisions they make around what should they how because I'm trying to think through like is what you are doing a replacement for some of the demand planning tools that are in the space currently? And basically with that, what is the element of execution that comes off of your platform that then feeds into whatever the EDI layer or the e-commerce layer or the layer of the ERP if they're like
Yeah.
processing orders directly with like the B2B clients? Like how does that work?
Yeah, so it is one way to look at it. There are three different modules within Abra AI, and check it out. Go to the website whenever you have a chance. But basically, what it is the first module, which is called Compass. What it does, it looks at your entire state of your inventory across the board, whether it's existing inventory, flow, workflow, or stealth inventory. And that's an analysis on what needs to be addressed right now. And so you have a decision fork that tells you, well, optimize these items that, let's say, are not moving within this specific store, right? The SKUs. And then it takes you to a workflow or what's called the allocation decision module, right? Within one of them, which is called flow. And what it does is basically looks at all the SKUs with scoring and then so you grab that basically that SKU, that single SKU, because decisions are made at the single SKU level
Right.
in the fashion industry. And so you once you click on that item, it basically presents three or four scenarios for decision making. Usually, I'll say probably three, and which are could be anything, could be from protecting margin or discounting, and it gives you different scenarios. And then you, let's say as the planner, you are making the decisions how you like to optimize that one as well. You get the AI that tells you, well, you should be distributing based on intelligence, obviously. You should be distributing this particular SKU across different stores, or different sales channels in this way. This is exactly a number. And you can go human in the loop. You can go and actually modify that. You can also assign different sales channels as well. It could go across the board, based on the fashion business, the fashion retailers. Not all fashion business do have stores. For
Right.
instance, I have, again, different scenarios where one of them is a family 40-year-old fashion brand from Spain. And basically what they do is they sell wholesale and they have
Mhm.
e-commerce. That's it. So that changes the dynamics a lot of the business. And so that's where the decision making. And then the AI basically generates, there's also generative AI that prepares basically all the lookbooks, the sales sheets, everything is automatic. Basically, all you have to do, it goes through a whole phase of different decisions, and you're just moving the flow, the workflow, the decision until the very end where for an agentic AI, basically what it will do is, well, do you want to move this inventory? It speaks to your logistics software that will literally say, move the black t-shirt you're wearing from point A to point B. So
Okay.
execute. So it takes you all the way from the problem all the way to the execution.
I know you got to jump in because we're about to run out of time, but Adrian,
I'm fine with time. I don't know about you guys.
I was gonna say I'd love to chat with you outside of this. I know I'm monopolizing a lot of the
Great
Q&A,
questions,
but I would love to chat more
but they're
about it.
great questions. I appreciate them.
Sure.
So I've got a final question then, Adrian. We're all on this call because we're building or we're helping others build. What's something that you've learned recently? Maybe it was a mistake. It took you down a path too far. You spent, time building in an area that is not beneficial. Can you help
Um,
us
yes.
help us by save us a few steps?
Well, one of the things as a builder, one of the things that I wish I had um, sort of, I suspected them, but I didn't know until I did them, which had to do like cost management. As you're building systems with AI, that was something that really obviously cost me money, a lot of it, and which had to do with the optimization of AI and tokens, and also how do you really decide how much AI truly, in the traditional sense or generative AI, you should apply to the system. So in other words, now I have a very good balance of deterministic, which is ML, right? Deterministic approach versus like what is truly generative AI and for when and for, the specific business cases. So for instance, for reasoning over, for instance, when it comes to the fashion product, basically the reasoning happens around the making sense of the different metrics of the feature engineering perspective, but then there's a lot of also deterministic because now you're dealing with actual hard data, right? Hard data, you can be sort of guessing and presenting, different scenarios just for the sake of generating multiple ideas. When it comes to hard financial data or inventory data, you have to be very deterministic. So balancing that, so always like to say I use 80-20, right? 80% is deterministic, 20% is reasoning when it comes to decisions, because that mimics more human behavior. And then obviously the other one, obviously cost management. So when you set up your system in the architecture, what's deterministic versus constant pushing, AI reasoning or generating a lot of things. Now you're getting into whether increasing costs or, if it's, let's say, the reverse or the inverse, actually, you're doing 80% reasoning, but your costs are going to be absolutely crazy, the compute costs and AI costs. So I wish I had an idea about that, but when you really get to see it at where you're truly applying and also where it makes sense within the business, the very specific business use case. And that boils down to the architecture, how you truly set up the entire system, not only from a coding perspective, from a business logic. So you really have to pay attention to that. You can't just say, well, we're gonna use AI because it's great, because it's cool, it generates. It's very exciting because you can, it never ends. That's the thing. AI never ends. It's the follow-up after the follow-up after the follow-up. But the reality is you gotta remain focused based on your business outcomes and make sure that you get done what you need to accomplish. What is the job you need to get done? And then make those choices around that. Again, it varies from business use cases and so on and so forth. So those are the learnings. And then the last one, to sort of continue extending, but it was being able to separate the ingestion of data and really have somebody else or some other system handle that portion, which is, for instance, I focus when it comes to Abra, all the data for enterprise level, I partner with Databricks. And so because you want to make sure that, again, garbage in, garbage out. When it comes to decisions in this particular use case, you can be hallucinating, you can be providing things that will be making basically the wrong decisions. So that data have to be impeccable, and impeccable not only from a normalization perspective, but it gets reason, how the AI reasons over that data that's being feature engineered. And I don't know if that's too technical what I said, but
It was perfect.
okay,
Thanks, Adrian.
of course.
Lots of learnings, and I like the case studies of your own companies. So appreciate you
Thank
coming
you.
on and sharing with us today.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, we'll be back here next week at the same time. Jump in, meet some new people, and learn something.
Great. Have a great day,
Have a
everybody.
great Tuesday.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.